Salam everyone. So the word hadith has been used widely and many Muslims around the world follow different types of hadith. Typically they say that the Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, or the top two ones, are the most authentic hadith, and the other ones are sort of like weak hadith and so on. So I'm not going to get into the details of what a hadith is. The objective of this lecture is to talk about the word hadith that occurs in the Quran itself. And there are about 28 occurrences of the word hadith in the Quran, okay, in one form or the other. The term hadith, the definition of this particular term, right, to begin, from the Arabic root hadatha, right, which is meaning to happen, or to tell a story or tell a happening or to report an account, to have or give as news or to speak of, right? It also means traditions seen as narrative and record. So all of these synonyms or the meanings fall into the actual root word of hadith, right? So I'm going to jump in and talk about all of these 28 occurrences of the word hadith in the Quran. And then you can decide once we finish towards the end of this lecture as to how to interpret the word hadith as it stated in the Quran, or to follow in parallel the other hadiths that are written by men. Okay, so let's begin. I'm going to jump to the first occurrence, which is in chapter 4, which is Surah Nisa, verse 42. So let me open up the Quran itself. And I'm going to go through this within the context as well. So I'm not just going to read one-liner. So we really understand the true context of what God is talking about when the word hadith is mentioned within these verses. So this is Surah An-Nisa, once again, chapter 4 of the Quran. And then let's start with the verse 40, right? So God says, God wrongs not even the weight of an atom, and if there be any good, he multiplies it and gives of himself a tremendous reward. Then how will it be when we bring of every community a witness, and we bring thee as a witness against these? On that day, those who are indifferent to warning and oppose the messenger will wish that the earth might be leveled with them, and they will not conceal from God any statement. Okay? Wala yaktumuna Allah hadithan. So here's the first occurrence of the word hadith. Because people on the day of judgment will not be able to hide any story, any hadith, any account, any narrative. So everything will be laid out on the table. Let's move to the next occurrence of the word, which is 478. Same surah, except chapter 4, verse 78. Okay, so let's see what Allah says, what God says in this. So I'm going to start with a little bit of context here from verse 77. Hast thou not considered those to whom it was said, restrain your hands and uphold the duty and give the purity? But when fighting is ordained for them, then some among them fear men like the fear of God, or a stronger fear. And they say, Our Lord, why hast thou ordained fighting for us? Or that thou wouldst but delay us a little while? Say thou, little is the enjoyment of this world, and the hereafter will be better for him who is in prudent fear. And you will not be wronged a hair upon a date stone. So wherever you be, death will overtake you, and though you be in castles but high, and if God befalls them, they say, This is from God. And if evil befalls them, they say, This is from thee. Say thou, all is from God. Then what ails these people? They scarcely understand a statement. La yukaduna yafkahuna hadithan. Okay, so here's another occurrence, talking about people who don't really believe what the Prophet is saying to these people, because they scarcely understand what is being narrated to them or what the story is being told to them. Okay, perfect. Let's continue on. Same surah, the next occurrence is verse 87, chapter 4. So let's navigate to 487. Scroll up a little bit here. So I'm going to start with the previous verse here within context, a little bit of context. And when you are greeted with a greeting, greet with better than that, or return it. God takes account of all things. God, there is no God save He. He will gather you on the day of resurrection, whereof there is no doubt. And who is more truthful than God in statement? وَمَنْ أَصْدَقُ مِنَ اللَّهِ حَدِيثًا. So God is saying, who is more truthful in narrating a story, right? Of course, God is, right? So keep that in mind as we move forward, because it's just going to build the actual narrative overall of the word hadith. So when we're done with this, you'll be having a greater understanding, a solid understanding of what this word means and how it's written within the context, okay? All right, so let's move on to the next one, which is same surah, verse 140. So I'm going to start with the previous verse. Those who spurn guidance while claiming virtue as allies rather than the believers, do they seek of them greatness? And greatness belongs to God altogether. And He has sent down upon you in the law that when you hear the proofs of God rejected and mocked, sit not with them until they jest on a subject other than that. So here's the word hadith as well, right? So sit not with them until they jest on a subject other than that, right? Or a different story. So this is within the context of people mocking the prophet's words, or what the prophet is saying to them, reciting the Quran. So God says, well, you don't have to sit with them until they talk about another story, right? Perfect. So these are the occurrences in chapter 4. The next occurrence is in chapter 6, verse 68. So let's navigate to 668. All right, so let's scroll up here. So God says, every report has a place, and you will come to know. And when thou seest those who jest concerning our proofs, turn thou away from them until they jest on a subject other than that. So basically the same as the previous surah, same kind of meaning, right? فَأَعْرِضْ عَنْهُمْ حَتَّى يَخُوضُوا فِي حَدِيثٍ غَيْرِهِ, right? So a different story, a different account. So if the people don't repudiate the proofs, right? So just turn thou away from them until they jest on a subject other than that. Great. The next occurrence is in chapter 7, verse 185. So let's navigate to, I'm going to start with verse 184. Have they not reflected? There is no madness in their companion. He is only a clear warner. Have they not considered the dominion of the heavens and the earth, and what things God has created, and that it may be that their term has drawn nigh? And in what narration after this they will believe? فَبِأَيِّ حَدِيثٍ بَعْدَهُ يُؤْمِنُونَ. So God is clearly saying, in what other narration after this Quran, right, will they believe in? And we know that the other hadiths, the other books, and all of the stories, right? And this is not only just these 7 books, by the way. Different sects within the Muslim community, they have their own hadiths, okay, narrated by their own leaders or imams or scholars and so forth. And also keep in mind that this is the Prophet narrating the Quran to the community, to the believers, or to all the people, right, around him at that time. So, and that's what he's saying. In what narration after this they will believe? And that's what God says, right? So it's clear at this point in time so far that the word hadith means a story, a narration, or an account, or report. But as believers or individuals who believe in the Quran, who study the Quran, it's pretty clear. فَبِأَيِّ حَدِيثٍ بَعْدَهُ يُؤْمِنُونَ. And in what narration after this they will believe. So we don't have to believe in any other narration but the Quran. Great. So let's move on to chapter 12, verse 6. All right, great. So I'm going to start with verse 5 within the Surah Yusuf. And then here God says, he said, O my son, which is Jacob, right? Yaqub telling his son. He said, O my son, tell thou not thy dream to thy brethren, lest they plan a plan against thee. The shaitan is to man an open enemy. Here's the verse 6. And thus will thy Lord choose thee and teach thee the interpretation of events. Ta'wil al-ahadith, right? Which is in plural. So, and complete his favor upon thee and upon the house of Yaqub. and he has completed it upon thy fathers before, Abraham and Ishaq, Ibrahim and Ishaq, right? So here again, the word hadith is being used as interpretation of events because Yusuf had the ability to interpret events. Okay, perfect. So this was chapter 12, verse 6. Let's navigate to chapter 12, verse 21. Same chapter. So I'm going to scroll down to 21 here. Here it is. And said he who bought them from Misr to his wife, be thou generous in his dwelling. It may be that he will benefit us, or we will take him as a son. And thus did we establish Yusuf in the land, and that we might teach him the interpretation of events. Right? Min ta'wil al-ahadith. Same word for Yusuf being told within the same surah. Okay, a couple of more occurrences in the same surah, 101 and 111. So I'm going to navigate to 101 first. Here we go. So God says in chapter 12, verse 101, my Lord, thou hast given me some dominion and hast taught me some of the interpretation of events, which is again ta'wil al-hadith. Same surah, Surah Yusuf, right? Talking about how God has given him the ability to interpret events. And then I'm going to navigate to 111 in the same surah. Let me verify. So it's 111, chapter 12. So there is in their narrative a lesson for those possessed of insight. It is not an invented narration. Okay, ma kana hadithan yuftara. So again, God is saying this is not an invented narration, but confirmation of what is within its scope, and an exposition of each thing, and guidance and mercy for people who believe. So this is again Surah Yusuf talking about the word hadith as being occurring in verse 101 of this particular chapter. The next occurrence occurs in chapter 18, verse 6. So let's navigate to chapter 18, verse 6. So I'm going to start with the previous verse here, or even go back up here a little bit. And warn those who say God has taken a son. No knowledge have they thereof, and nor did their fathers. Great is the word that comes out of their mouth. They speak only a lie. Then wouldst thou perchance destroy thy soul, following hard upon them from grief, if they believe not in this narrative. Okay? يُؤْمِنُوا بِهَذَا الْحَدِيثِ أَسَفًا. So God is actually speaking to the prophet, right? That wouldst thou, destroy your own soul, because these people are just not believing in this narrative. يُؤْمِنُوا بِهَذَا الْحَدِيثِ, right? This narrative. So far, the concept that we've been following for this particular word within the Quran so far is strictly focusing on this narrative, right? The Quran itself. In other words, the story of the Quran, the whatever is being mentioned within the Quran itself alone. Perfect. So we're at chapter 18, verse 6 that we just took a look at. Let's navigate to chapter 20, verse 9. And has there come to thee the story of Musa? When he saw a fire, he said to his people, stay here, I perceive a fire. Perhaps I can bring you therefrom a firebrand, or find guidance at the fire. So let's scroll up, because this is where God says, has the story of Musa come to you, right? Here it is. وَهَلْ أَتَاكَ حَدِيثُ Musa, right? So again, the word hadith means a story, narration, account, and so on. And again, this story reflects the fact that we as believers, of course, must believe in Quran alone. Has this story of Musa come to you, right? Great. Let's go to the next one, which is chapter 23, verse 44. Scroll up here. So a couple of verses up, I'm going to start within just a small context. Then brought we into being after them other generations. No community brings forward its term, and it does not postpone. Then sent we our messengers in succession, Each time his messenger came to a community, it rejected him, then caused we some of them to follow others and made them legends. Then away with the people who do not believe. So here's the word ahadith again. Then caused we some of them to follow others and made them legends. Okay? So again, ahadith means following others' stories, right? Because people follow other people, men follow other men, right? And that's how it is. They typically reject messengers. And God says, in fact, all people rejected all of the messengers that were sent, typically, right? Very few became believers. Majority of the people of those messengers, right? Rusulana, which is the plural, right? Messengers, people rejected them, okay? Because typically they followed وَجَعَلْنَاهُمْ أَحَادِيثُ فَعُبْدًا لِقَوْمٍ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ, other people's stories, okay? And we made them legends as stories. All right, great. So we are at 2344. Let me go to chapter 31, verse 6. So chapter 31, verse 6, which is Surah Luqman, which is chapter 31. I'm going to start with verse 6. So God says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَشْتَرِي لَهْوَ الْحَدِيثِ, and among men is he who purchases the diversion of narration, okay? Or who purchases other accounts or stories, right? Written by men, not sent by God, but written by man itself, right? So there are people among men, there are people who purchase other stories, right? So that kind of rings a bell, right? That we are typically following other stories, other books that are not sent by God, nor written by any prophet. Okay, and that's important because Prophet Muhammad didn't write the hadith himself, right? He didn't give another booklet in addition to the Quran to his community, right? And that's exactly what God is saying here. And among men is he who purchases the diversion of narration. And keep in mind, once again, these verses are being delivered by Prophet Muhammad, by this messenger, right? So when the messenger is actually reciting these verses, he's telling all his people, hey, among you are people who purchase diversion from this narration, okay, from the narration itself. And the reason why they purchase, that he might be led away from the path of God without knowledge and make mockery of it. These have a humiliating punishment. Okay, so this verse is fairly clear as to the fact that we don't need to purchase any other narration except the Quran itself. Now, of course, there's a huge argument out there that the Quran is incomplete, the Quran doesn't have a lot of things, the Quran doesn't tell us what to do. Well, it doesn't need to tell you what to do. It gives you the law, it gives you guidance. You decide what you need to do. For example, if you're sick, you need to take medicine. If you are cold, you need to wear some clothes. And every single one of us wear different types of clothes when you feel cold, okay? So the Quran doesn't tell you specifically what to wear. The Quran just gives you guidance, and this is the guidance for us, that among men who purchases the diversion of narration, that he might be led away from the path of God without knowledge and make mockery of it. Great, so this was chapter 31, verse 6. Okay, a few more left to go. Chapter 33, verse 53. O you heed warning, enter not the households of the Prophet for a meal without waiting for its time, save that leave be given to you. But when you are called, enter, and when you have eaten, disperse, and seek not familiarity through storytelling. Okay? The Hadith. So this is again when people used to enter Prophet's house, when Prophet used to call them for dinner or whatever. God is saying, hey, don't sit around, don't talk a whole lot, just eat and then just kind of leave, right? Disperse and seek not familiarity through storytelling, and don't sit around and tell stories and waste time, basically. Chapter 34, verse 19. So let's navigate to verse 19 here of chapter 34. And we made between them and the cities, we had blessed cities visible, and determined the journey between them. Travel among them by night, and day in safety. But they said, Lord, has our Lord made the distance between our journey stages? And they wronged their souls. Then we made them tales told. فَجَعَلْنَاهُمْ أَحَادِيث, and scattered them to the four winds. In that are proofs for everyone patient, grateful. So once again, God made all of these people who didn't listen stories, right? Because they didn't really believe what God had to say. All right, great. So let's go to 39, verse 23. God sent down the best narration. So verse 23 of chapter 39, which is Surah Az-Zumr, clearly starts off with the perfect statement. Allahu nazzala ahsan al-hadith, right? The best narration. So this Quran itself is the best narration. What else do we need but the Quran itself, right? Because this is the best narration. There's no other narration that claims to be best except this particular book, okay? So this is again chapter 39, verse 23. Let's go to chapter 45, verse 6. Those are the proofs of God. We recite them to thee aright. Then in what narration after God, his proofs, will they believe? فَبِأَيِّ حَدِيثٍ بَعْدَ اللَّهِ, what other narration after God and his proofs will they believe? And that's exactly is being repeated. Understand, as we go through all of these occurrences of the word hadith within the Quran, God is saying, wait, this is the only book, this is the only narration, this is the only story, this is the only account that you need to believe in and that you need to follow, right? And the messenger exactly is narrating these verses to its community. So God says we recite them to thee all right, natlu alayka bil haq. Then in what narration after God and his proofs will they believe? Right? So think about this. All the other books except the Quran that people believe and follow, think about it. All right, great. So this was chapter 45, verse 6. Let's go to chapter 51, verse 24. So we're at 51, verse 24. Has there come to thee the story of honored guests of Ibrahim? Hal ataka hadithu. Right? So again, a story. Has there come to thee the story of the honored guests of Ibrahim? So once again, the same occurrence of the word hadith within chapter 51, verse 24. Let's go to chapter 52, verse 30. And let them produce a narrative, the like thereof, if they be truthful, right? Because the context is that, let me go up a little bit so we can see. This is Surah Al-Tur. I'm going to start with verse 31. Say thou, so wait, I am with you among those waiting. If their reason commands them this, or if they be a people transgressing all bounds, or if they say, he has invented it, the truth is, they do not believe. And let them produce a narrative, the like thereof, if they be truthful. فَلْيَأْتُوا بِحَدِيثٍ مِثْلِهِ, right? So God is challenging people that bring forth a narrative that is like this, like the Quran, right? And guess what? All these other books of ahadith and other stories and accounts and narratives, tons and tons of books out there, right? That I've read and have, gone through. Uh, these are nothing but just stories, right? But the best of the best narrative is the Quran itself. And the Quran, in fact, challenges everyone, فَلْيَأْتُوا بِحَدِيثٍ. Let them produce a narrative and like thereof, if they be truthful. So this was chapter 52, verse 34. Let's go to chapter 53, verse 59. Perfect. أَفَمِنْ هَذَا الْحَدِيثِ تَعْجُبُونَ. Do they marvel at this narrative? That's one of the questions that God is asking them within Surah An-Najm, verse 59. Okay? So, once again, it's pretty straightforward that people marvel at this narrative, right? In other words, they don't believe in this narrative. Do they think it's not from God? Do they think this is not real? Do they think this is not complete? Right? Do they marvel at this narrative? Let's go to chapter 56 next, verse 81. So 56, verse 81, once again, God says, this is Surah Al-Waqia, and God says, is it this narration you take lightly? أَفَبِهَذَا الْحَدِيثِ أَنْتُمْ مُدْحِنُونَ, and make rejection thereof your livelihood, right? So once again, God is saying, are you taking this narration lightly? You think it's not complete? You think it doesn't have a lot of things to say to you? It is a complete guidance, in fact, on the other hand, right? So people are taking the community of the Prophet, right? And the Prophet is narrating these ayats, these verses to the community, right? To people. And they're taking, this particular Quran lightly. Don't we all, by the way, today, right? Even today, if you think about it, people don't even really talk about the Quran itself alone, right? They, of course, talk about other books, other accounts, other stories in relation to the Quran. And so as to say that they say the Quran is not complete. In fact, the books of Ahadith, that the stories not written by the Prophet, not narrated by God, but written by men, complete the Quran. Think about this. So this is actually just the opposite of what the Quran is saying. All right, so we just did chapter 56, verse 81. So bear with me here. A few more left. We're going to go to chapter 66, verse 3. And when the Prophet confided a statement to one of his wives, and that's what it means. وَإِذَا أَصَرُّ النَّبِيُّ إِلَى بَعْضِ أَزْوَاجِهِ حَدِيثًا. Okay? When she told it. So here, God is talking about in this surah is Surah At-Tahrim, verse 3. The Prophet, basically silently told one of his wives a story, a hadith, an account, a narrative, right? Oh, statement. And that's what this means, the word hadith. Let's go to chapter 68, verse 44. So in this surah, which is chapter 68, Surah Al-Qalam, verse 44. So leave thou me with those who repudiate this narrative. Very important. فَذَرْنِي وَمَن يُكَذِّبُ بِهَذَا الْحَدِيثِ. So God says to the Prophet, leave all these people who repudiate this story, this account, this Quran, this narrative, this statement, right? Or these statements. So leave them, okay? Because God will ask them directly at the day of judgment, why did you leave this Quran? And if you recall in Surah Al-Furqan, the Prophet is going to witness and he's going to say to God at the day of judgment that my community, inni qawm ittakhazu hazal Quran mahjura, they left the Quran they abandoned the Quran. So the Prophet Muhammad is going to witness at the day of judgment by saying this, right? That the community abandoned the Quran. So this kind of goes along with this particular verse as well. Okay? All right, so we're at 68:44. Let's go to chapter 77, verse 50. Once again, God repeats. This is Surah Al-Mursalat, verse 50. Then in what narration after it will they believe? فَبِأَيِّ حَدِيثٌ بَعْدَهُ يُؤْمِنُونَ. So once again, people are not believing in this narrative, in this Quran of the community of the Prophet, right? Because people, and even today, think about it, Muslims around the world or different sects or within the Muslim community, they don't really just talk about the Quran itself. They bring in external texts from all over the place, written by men, claiming that these external texts would complete the Quran. That's not true. Anyways, all right, so we're at 77, verse 50. Let's go to chapter 79, verse 15. Has there come to thee the account of Musa? Once again, Halataka Hadithu Musa. This has been repeated from the previous chapters, right? So once again, Hadithu Musa means the story of Musa. Let's go to chapter 87, verse 17, or rather chapter 85, verse 17. Has there come to thee the account of the forces of Pharaoh and of Thamud? Halataka Hadithul Junud, Pharaoh wa Thamud, right? So once again, has the story of the forces of Pharaoh and Thamud has the story been narrated to you, right? Or do you know this story, right? All right, so last, chapter 88, verse 1. This is Surah Al-Ghashiyah. God says, in the name of God, the Almighty, the Merciful, has there come to thee the narrative of the enveloping, Halataka Hadithul Ghashiyah, faces that day humble toiling. Okay? So once again, the word Hadith. So this surah concludes all of the 28 occurrences of the word Hadith as mentioned in the Quran and as narrated, as recited by Prophet Muhammad to people. So hopefully you understand the word hadith in the Quran, right, as being used in the Quran alone itself. And of course, by the end of this, you understand that God is clearly talking about hadith being the Quran itself, right? That's the best of the best narrations out there. And what other narrations would we believe in other than the Quran itself? If you like this, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, because I do regular research in the Quran itself, and this is sort of like the words and the terms that occur in the Quran, and then we pick out all the context and just kind of get the sense or guidance from the Quran itself. So from this lecture, I hope it's clear that the only true guidance is from the Quran itself, and we don't need any other external text to be told what is being explained in the Quran itself, because the Prophet did not write the Hadith. If you would like to take a look at the other lectures that I've recorded, or the 270 occurrences of the word kul, I'm going to provide the link in the description. Go ahead, take a look at those. I hope this helps. If you have any questions, certainly post in the discussion area. I'd be glad to answer, glad to talk about this. And with this, assalamu alaikum.